This is the new TC Pride Podcast, Episode 38, Part 2 of Building Bridges with Representative Erin Maye Quade. TC Pride Podcast, we are on location with Representative Erin Maye Quade. So I've been out talking to a lot of people since the election, and obviously there were a lot of disappointed people after the election. You said earlier tonight that you woke up after the election with the same disappointment that a lot of people are feeling, but also a lot of energy around wanting to do something. And then you laid out a system tonight for how you and maybe other people in the same situation can come up with actionable items, I think you said, to tackle with that energy.
So yeah, absolutely. So when I woke up after the election, I was devastated. I mean, it's a very real trauma to watch someone who sexually assaults women be elected to be the leader of the free world. But I looked for those first few days for someone who was going to lead me somewhere to do something. And it took me a minute to say, oh no, that's you. You have to lead now. That's literally what you were elected to do. And so I started thinking about, well, what did I want? I wanted something to do. I didn't want something to post. I didn't want something to like. I didn't want something to share. I wanted something to do. And I started thinking about all the conversations I had at the doors. I started thinking about the conversations we were having statewide and nationally. And the three things that I came up with here in this community were talking about racial justice, electoral politics reform, so ranked choice voting. Angie Craig would have won if we had ranked choice voting in CD2 or in Minnesota. More people voted for not Jason Lewis than Jason Lewis. And then civic education, like I mentioned before, making sure that we know as a community all the levers to pull for what thing, who to contact, for what issue, what the response is going to be, how it functions, deadlines, timelines, realistic expectations, but also ways to hold people accountable. And it's hard to hold people accountable for something you're not sure they're supposed to be doing in the first place, or to hold them accountable if you don't even know who they are. So I really want to make sure that people are incredibly connected to their government. When we say for the people, of the people, by the people, that implies that the people know all of the things that are in it. And so I want to educate people about their government, particularly our state government, and then have Surge come down, showing up for racial justice, or Voices for Racial Justice, come down and give us some language, give us some tools, give us some training, because, as diverse as our community is becoming and diverse as our state is becoming, it's still pretty white. And I know that, people by and large do want to make sure that our society prioritizes and ensures equality and liberty. But if we don't know how to participate in ensuring that happens, then we just step back. Because again, it doesn't always affect every community. It doesn't always affect every person. And so if the people it only affects are the ones fighting for it, we'll never get it and it'll never be real. Particularly because for racial justice, people of color are so underrepresented at the legislature and in Congress. So those were some of the action items for me, but I did talk about having it be appropriate to the community. What can the community do? What can they undertake? What do they desire to know and learn about? I mean, for me, equity has always been part of what I do and think about and what I want to lead on, but I'm able to lead on it so much better because my community shares that need. It's not something that I can just participate on like a quiet table in the corner. I can say, yes, myself and my entire community who really desires this, here's what we're doing and here's what we want. And I think that was wonderful going through the election to realize that as well, that my values are shared within the community. But something that's appropriate for the community, something that they want to do, that they care about, and that people will invest their time in, and something to do, right?
Yeah. All right, and last question. Let's see. So in your thank you post after the election, you said this. You said, "My heart aches over the deep divide our nation is feeling right now. The sadness and fear that many in our community are experiencing is real, but it will not stop us from moving forward together. Together, we will take a breath, come together, and recommit ourselves to the fight for a future of shared prosperity and opportunity, for safe and healthy communities, for cradle to college education, for women's health and choice, for the equal access to the Minnesota dream that we all deserve." So immediately following the election, there was quite a divide, even within communities that were feeling disappointed by the results of the election, that were pretty much split between, let's work together and give him a chance, all the way to he's not my president and worse. Now, you mentioned Paul Wellstone, one of the people who you said influenced you greatly, who was most famous for saying, one of the things that he was famous for was saying, we all do better when we all do better, like you mentioned earlier. You also said tonight, earlier, that, we do better when we work together, right? So my question to you is, how do we work together to heal the divide, like you said, while standing by our principles and keeping our commitment to fighting for all the things you mentioned?
So I think there's two things. I think the calls, when you talk about coming together and healing to all the way over to he's not my president, I think those are two very separate things. I think there are people who are like, yeah, no, that man represents literally zero things ideologically, but as a human that I want represented in my government. And then I think the people who are saying come together, I think some of those people really think that this is about being a sore loser. It's about the Democrat didn't win. And so I think that there's a lot of space to talk to each other, and there's a lot of space to make space to talk to each other in a real way. We heard a lot about in this election, we need to reach out to the white working class. We need to understand their economic anxiety. And the first thought I had was, what about the fight for 15 doesn't resonate as economic anxiety? What is it about the wealth gap and the income gap that doesn't resonate as economic anxiety? So I don't think we need to change any priorities that we have. I think part of the entire message has been economic anxiety. But what is it that made people feel like it was separate from what we were talking about? And I think that has a lot to do with the rhetoric of our president-elect, right? So there's things that we can come together on to understand each other more, to understand that what happens to a family in North Minneapolis isn't different from a family in Jeffers, Minnesota. Both families want to feed their children, send them to good schools, and make sure that they can maybe afford college, school supplies, and food, right? That's economic anxiety no matter where you live. And I think that we can do more to connect each other, to connect our stories, to understand our struggles are pretty universally shared. And I also think that we have to start identifying, we're not going to move to the middle on homophobia and racism and xenophobia, Islamophobia and misogyny. And, we're not moving to the middle on that. That's not a compromise that we're going to make. And so when people say we should come together or we should unify, we're not unifying around modifying our acceptable, that misogyny is a little more acceptable now. So we're not going to come together around that. We can come together around, we might have different thoughts on choice. That's not going to stop us from working together to make sure that women don't find themselves in a situation where they're going to have a baby that they can't take care of or don't want, right? And so I think the calls to come together is that deep desire for people not to feel like they're divided from their neighbors or from their community. And I think that's why we didn't have any more specifics than come together, right? So we can do that work. It's hard. It's not easy. And I think sometimes people wish it was easy, that it could just go away. But we did bring up a lot of latent things that existed in our country. And then we just shed a light on some of the things that were just pretty loud already, maybe not in our own lives. So there's more of us than there are of them. And by us, I mean people who love humanity as it exists, who are excited to celebrate the things that do make us different and the things that draw us together and the things that make us Minnesotans, because that's who we are in the state. We are Minnesotans. And so there's more of us than there are of the people who are, build the wall, go back to your country, what are you doing here? And then all of those words that I can't actually even say in public that people have heard. So when we work together, we do better. I know that policy works best when it comes from both sides. Even if I don't get everything I want, that's okay, because it shouldn't always be what I want or what somebody else wants. We can't have all the things, as I say. Compromise is not a 4-letter word, neither is bipartisanship. But I get nervous when we make everything hyper-partisan. I get nervous when things that are climate change is real, it's fact, it's science. That shouldn't be a partisan issue. The question is, what are we going to do about it? That could be a partisan issue. Poverty and alleviating poverty is not a partisan issue. We can talk about what methods we go about doing that, but in and of itself, poverty is not a partisan issue. And so I think when I hear come together, I do hear the desire for people to not be demonized for being a Democrat or Republican or for an independent or a libertarian or what have you. It's to understand that some people can be all four. You could lay on the entire spectrum depending on the issue. And I can't imagine how alienating that might be, because I'm I'm a Democrat. I've always been a Democrat. There's some things I'm like, not so much. But then, I'm mostly Democrat. And I can't imagine how alienating it would be. And this is where I think this comes from, where they want the two huge sides to stop pretending like the other one is literally the devil. And also, when we call fire out all the time, when there's actually a fire, that makes it really hard. And I think that's what's going to be hard about the next 4 years, is that we spent 8 years demonizing Obama as if he really hated this country, or as if he didn't care about the Constitution. And I don't think there's ever been a president in our United States of America, whether I agree with him or disagree with him, that doesn't love this country, that doesn't deeply desire to defend and protect the Constitution. I just didn't agree with the way they were doing it. Now I believe we have someone who doesn't even know what the Constitution says, let alone cares about defending it. And I think it's hard to elevate that above all the other noise that's existed before now, because it's all been said, right? We called our president a bunch of things, terrible things. And by we, I mean not me. But he's been called everything under the sun. And so it makes it really hard to call attention to some egregious things that are already happening because it's already been said. So when I also hear the, give him a chance, Steve Bannon, for me, was that chance. He's a white supremacist and proud of it, and he built a platform to promote it. So I will never stop hoping that our president-elect succeeds. I want him to. I just don't know if he or his team has the tools to do it in a way that works for all of us. I fear that this very wealthy, very white, very male-dominated cabinet and advisory board will prioritize the needs of those people. So we work together. We make sure that our voices are always louder. We make sure that we are always there, we're ever vigilant, and that we bring nuance back into the conversation. Something like build the wall is not a policy position, and it should never be taken as such. We should demand nuance. We should demand intentionality. We should demand discipline from all of our elected officials. And that's why I hold it so dear and close. I mentioned at the beginning, because democracy is built on a foundation of discipline. And what is our foundation could easily become our vice grips. And that is one of my biggest fears. So I'll end it on a positive note and say that the energy, whether it was anxious energy or excited energy or whatever that people felt after the election, they want to do something. I'm here to provide that outlet. I'm here to connect people to their government in a way that allows them to actually do and make the changes that they want to make, or be heard about what they think and care about. I'm proud of us for waking up after the election and being like, yep, can't keep doing it the way I was doing it, because it didn't work. So I feel like we have this unique opportunity for the first time in a long time to get people re-energized and re-engaged. And I want to be a person who leads people to engagement in whatever that looks like in their lives.
And since the election, you've been out in the community, out in the community that you represent, just meeting people and talking to people and kind of finding out what their concerns are and what you can do as their representative. Is there anything that you're involved with, any sort of events or causes or anything that you have coming up that you'd kind of like people to know about, or let them know how they can get involved with?
Sure. So we just started a League of Women Voters chapter here in Apple Valley, Burnsville, Lakeville. So people should absolutely join that. I have been meeting with anyone who will say, I'm in your district and I'd love to talk with you. So if you live in 57A, House District 57A, send me an email, erinforhouse@gmail.com, and we can meet and we can have coffee, whether it's a group of constituents or it's a business that you own, or a group of moms that meet on Friday, what have you. Call me. I would love to join you. I think the best way I can represent this community is by staying in constant contact, because you can't represent a community you don't talk to. So I'm willing to have those conversations, how easy or hard they may be. And I hope people will reach out to me and be as engaged with me as I'd like to be with them.
And for people who don't live in 57A, who maybe would like to create that kind of relationship with their own representative, what would you say would be a good way to go about that?
So I would say, reach out to them, because more likely than not, they will want to connect with you and be in community with you. They represent you. But if you can't, send me an email at erinforhouse@gmail.com, and I will try to connect you with them. I will do everything I can to make sure that people have access to their government, to their elected officials, and that if they're not being responsive, then you can change that. Their job interviews every 2 years. So if you're not getting the responses you need, then I guess you have some different kind of organizing to do. But I'd love to help anyone in whatever way I can, connect with their elected officials.
Building bridges isn't easy. Thank you so much, Erin, for your time, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thank you so much.
The TC Pride podcast has been a production of Podletter Media and Twin Cities Pride. Subscribe now on iTunes or Google Play and submit your first Pride story at myfirstpride.org.